They are free to leave.
Nobody is going to hurt them. Nobody is going to attack them. This person is not in harm's way.
Yes, they're right in front of me right now. They're holding signs.
This person is not in harm's way.
I need funds, genocide. I need help. I know that, but they're surrounding me. They won't let me move.
No, you are free to move. You are free to move. She is free to move.
You are free to move. You are free to move.
She's free to move. She's free to leave. She is free to leave. No one is surrounding her.
Nobody is surrounding you.
She is free to leave.
You are free to leave.
There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's Western University. These are students. They're surrounding me. I can take a
She's free to leave. No one is surrounding her.
No one is surrounding her.
No one is surrounding her.
I'm just walking my dog. I need help.
She's free to leave.
I'm a Jewish American. I need help. Please come and help me. I'm wearing a white Adidas shirt. I have a dog with me. Walking a dog. I need help.
I've got to say, got to take a side here. The individual I feel worst for this situation is that dog. This is his walk time, and he's not getting his fucking walk because his person would rather file a police report because she has a weird political axe to grind. So,
Yeah. The dog looked more confused than anyone. The dog's like, why aren't we leaving? The dog looked more aware of the actual situation.
The dog's like, I have the zoomies, just let me go.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like there's an issue. I think we could just go.
Yeah, it seems like there's all this space here.
Look, I agree. I agree with her that she needs help. That I will. That I will say. Yeah. That's another classic line. I'm a Jewish American.
Jewish American. I need help.
And I need help. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
that is. Yeah, the kind of professional who'd be most relevant there would not be in law enforcement. But in any case, I am Ben Burgis. This is Give Them an Argument. I am joined, as always, by our super producer, Jake Appett, and our very talented graphic designer, J. Andrew World. I am also joined, once again, by Jay Ponte. Jay's been involved in pivotal social justice movements such as Occupy Wall Street, Standing Rock, Bernie Sanders campaigns, 2016 and 2020. He co-created the Bank Exit Fossil Fuel Divestment campaign, and he spearheaded campaigns and direct actions nationwide. He is also the author of a book called Be the Revolution: How Occupy Wall Street and the Bernie Sanders Movement Reshaped American Politics. And he's here with us today because obviously we're all thinking and talking about these encampments that have been going on college campuses, and based on all that experience, I know Jay has some thoughts that he wanted to come share on that. So Jay, how are you doing, brother?
Good to be back. Always love the show and love that somebody's talking about this stuff. And yeah, just solidarity to all the students standing up for human rights.
Yeah, I actually tried to go to USC because I've been seeing a bunch of stuff on Thursday about encampment there and all these people being arrested there and everything that was going on. I saw Crystal Ball posted this video of this guy, this like older Hispanic guy who is being interviewed by some news crew who are like very confused by his very simple position, which is like, yeah, I'm here because my daughter's doing this and I think it's awesome and I want to support it. Like, oh, aren't you concerned? He's like, I don't know. I mean, if she got arrested protesting genocide, I'd actually be a pretty proud father. And so anyway, so I did actually stop by the USC campus, not that far from where I live, the other day. But by the time I got there, they had that place locked down extremely tight. I think they'd arrested like 93 people there the day before, and they actually canceled their main commencement ceremony because of that. So the valedictorian was a Muslim woman who had protested Gaza, and I think there was concern that she would bring it up in her commencement speech, and so they decided to just cancel the ceremony altogether, and rather than have that horrific outcome come to pass, that somebody would disturb the occasion by reference to human suffering in the wider world. I'm going to be in New Jersey this weekend. It's a little bit in flux. I was originally going to give a talk at Princeton, like in a classroom, right, hosted by a student group, and I've been emailing the organizer today. I might actually just be speaking at the encampment. We'll find out. But yeah, I did, before we kind of get to Jay, I did want to just share a couple of the images. I'm sure people have seen a lot of these before, but of some of what's been going on, because this is really striking, right? So this is not even the worst example. It's just one that was particularly funny to me and particularly striking to me, since I lived for years in Atlanta, where, of course, I worked as a philosophy professor for a couple of years at Georgia State University Perimeter College. And so this first one is also in Atlanta, and this one's at Emory. Atlanta actually has like a zillion colleges. And this also involves a philosophy professor.
I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do for you right now?
Yes, can you call the philosophy department office and tell them I've been requesting?
Philosophy department?
Yes, call the philosophy department office.
I will. What's your...
Noel Majesty, I'm chair of the philosophy department.
I got you.
President-elect.
I got you.
Which is just a really striking image because, look, I know people always say, oh, but you don't know what happened before the video started. It's like, yeah, I'm sure, to steal a line, that she was probably, firing Katyusha rockets moments before that happened. But, naively, it does not look to me like that woman was an imminent threat to public safety. So the image of a masked cop, like dragging her, like she's like in handcuffs already, is like pulling her, it's just very, very important to apprehend her and bring her into detention as fast as at all possible, I think is kind of emblematic of a lot of what's been going on.
Listen, if that doesn't convince libs to care, then nothing will, because that looks like The Handmaid's Tale or something like that.
It does.
So if they don't care after that, then they're just not. Then people, I'm kind of kidding, but I'm kind of serious. But I'm curious, were you going to show some of the other ones, or?
Yeah. So well, sticking with Emory, we have the econ prof. Yeah, that woman's an economics professor. Again, I find it extremely unlikely that she was engaged in mass violence, and they were just wrestling her to the ground moments before she would have killed everybody there. Andy looks like he might have a dissent.
I mean, if she was like a conservative economics professor, maybe it might be called for, because their policies have killed thousands, hundreds of thousands of people over the years. But just in the context of what we're talking about here, I'm with you.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm just a big bleeding heart lib about this, but I have to say, I think that even people with bad takes probably shouldn't have that happen to them.
So if Milton Friedman was arrested because he was at a
if Milton Friedman was walking past somebody who was manhandling one of his students, and he said, "Oh my God, what are you doing?" And I guess he like touched the cop's back. That was the big crime there, to like try to get their attention. And the cops then shoved Milton down on the concrete and while also at one point like holding both wrists and while simultaneously ordering them to go on the ground, which like makes it impossible to carry out the order. I think that would disturb me. Also, I saw somebody, just because Twitter discourse is what it is, saying like, isn't this typical something privilege, that she's saying I'm a professor. I actually think it's pretty relevant that she's saying that she has like a reason to be there. This is her place of employment. Like she surely has a right to walk past, what's going on here. But yeah, this is really amazing stuff. We've got more that we're going to do later, but I think that the sort of larger context here, right, is fairly clear that, there are, I think, quite a few of these. And by the way, everybody wants to hyper focus on the ones at Ivy League colleges because it's easier to demonize them as, pampered kids or whatever. But trust me, there's lots of places that are not remotely elite, where the same thing is happening. And actually, above and beyond everything else, it strikes me as really dumb. Like, just like all morality and politics aside, just from the perspective of the admin, like, semester's over, man. Like it's like a week from being over. You couldn't wait out some drum circles and chanting for a week or two. And if anything, I think that this is the effect of all of this is, pouring. I mean, I guess this is good as far as it goes, because I want more people to protest the genocide in Gaza. But, I think that the effect of all this is really to pour gasoline in the fire. But I want to bring in Jay because I know, you've been around and around the block on protest and direct action and, and sort of equivalent things. I think, certainly if you think about people digging into encampments in certain respects, it's like, Occupy in Zuccotti Park, way back when. So I'm curious what you would kind of take from those experiences, like what, that might be of use to some of these organizers.
Yeah, thanks. So great to be here. First off, I do not speak for Occupy Wall Street. I only speak for myself. That's important. So based on my own experience, and I wrote this book because we have very little movement memory from the last decade, the last 12 years. We have a lot from looking back to the 60s and 70s, and before that, civil rights, the Black and brown liberation movements, anti-war movements, but very little literature about what happened in the last 12 years because the world has changed quite a lot. So I wrote a book about that to show not only did Occupy not fail, to show what the legacy was, but also hopefully we could learn from some of those lessons, because it was one of the last times that what you might call broadly what I call the corporate state, or the establishment was shook. And what I mean by the corporate state, it's important to know what this is because it is the intersection of industry, of elected officials, of the police state, of media, and paid consultants who work together to consciously strategize how to dismantle these movements. So, and that's the thing. We know that in Occupy Wall Street, for instance, the mayors across the country, the sheriffs across the country had conference calls to plan how they were going to demolish, how they're going to dismantle the occupations. But I hope that there are some lessons we could learn from what happened in Occupy. There's a bunch, I wrote an entire chapter just kind of on that, on the tactics that did work and some of the things that didn't work. So there's a lot to unpack. Is there anywhere in particular you want to zoom into, or?
Yeah, well, I mean, so
I could talk about this for an hour.
Sure. Fair enough, Fred. Maybe we should have you on sometime that we could actually do that. But in general, right? Like, what are mistakes that you think might have been made there that you think that people can learn from going forward?
Sure. And again, I also don't know, I haven't been part of what the students are doing. So there may be things that the students are getting intuitively, they already are doing. So if it's not relevant, I can only speak to some of the things we saw during Occupy, which were some of the specific challenges that came up were, I think optics were always a challenge. I think, not allowing the media, not having a consciousness of how the media was going to portray the movement, not having, because there was such a very anarchisty approach to it, which I like, but there are tactical issues with that sort of like nobody's a leader. So I think the frame that nobody is a leader, I understand the thinking behind it, but when you have people who are clear, like in other sort of mobilizations, Standing Rock, Poor People's Campaign, a national call for a moral revival, which I was part of. There were people who were cleared for media, for instance. The reason that's important is because you have a mixed population. If you're, USC is near downtown, and you're bound to get a mixed bag of the unhoused population, which can present its own set of challenges. So if you're not skillfully working with that who has a right to be there, but then again, you're going to get the media, you're going to go and interview that person, and they're going to be the face. They're then going to be the face of the movement, right? So that's, I think, those are a few, being able to really clearly understand how the opposition is trying to frame you and having your own set of media points to be able to really clearly and succinctly articulate, this is why we're here, this is what we're about, because they are going to miscategorize you, they are going to gaslight, they're going to make shit up. That is part of the MO, if that makes sense. We see it over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, does it, I guess one sort of bigger question about that, thinking back to Occupy and thinking about now, is that, a lot of what you're talking about, I think, right, is sort of message discipline and like kind of like larger sort of strategic awareness of, what you're doing and how it's going to come across and all of that stuff. And I guess I wonder how that does intersect with like the way, like at Occupy, like it seemed like a lot of, there's a lot of emphasis on the idea of like super horizontalist organizing, being leaderless. And I guess I wonder if you think those two goals are in tension with each other, right? That like that, in other words, that you have, that if you're sort of saying, okay, here are things that we all need to be really careful about not doing, or, then, does that suggest some degree of centralization? And if so, how does that all fit together?
Yeah. So some of the models that Occupy adopted, and again, there were each camp had its own ideas. There was an inter-Occupy working group that created sort of a communication across the different encampments. So, you can't paint with a single brush because there were different encampments had different sets of challenges, but there was consensus-based decision-making. That was a thing. There were also working groups. There were a lot of working groups. I do think one takeaway is that you can't have a real meeting with 400 people. Like, just some of those meetings were just like, what are we doing here for 4 hours? Like trying to actually make decisions with 400 people. I think, we figured out that's not going to work,
I mean, especially if you're trying to make decisions by some sort of consensus or quasi-consensus, procedure, right? Because it's sort of bad enough when you can at least like have a vote and it's 201 to 199 and you're done, right? But like if you have a more complicated procedure and it's also 400 people, that seems hard to see how that's going to be functional.
Yeah. Did you guys see the video? I think it's like this woman, I don't know if she actually started crying, but basically like she was trying to just troll everyone, and they were like, yeah, talk to our media contact. I forget which encampment it was at, but basically they were, practicing message discipline, and this wannabe Zionist troll had a meltdown because she couldn't talk to anyone. Totally anecdotally, but at my own university's encampment, and it just seemed really well organized, and there were committee leaders, and there was I don't know. So yeah, I'm just saying based on what you're saying and what I experienced, it seems like there's maybe some positive indications, but I don't know.
Sounds like they're on it.
Yeah,
the kids are all right, man.
Yeah. That was we could find the video. That was I know that's anecdotal evidence, but it seems
so
like
I think
they
our
didn't get
friend Jeremy in the comments, Drunk Dalek, I think this is what he's talking about. Montana trucker at the UCLA encampment this weekend.
Yeah. She was crying because she couldn't get her soundbite, but it just kind of goes to what you were saying, Jay. Hopefully, there's some positive developments going on.
Well, I really hope that I really hope that people read Jay's book because like agree or disagree with like any particular point or whatever. It's a valuable service because he's been around a lot of this stuff for a very long time and has put a lot of thought into kind of what works, what doesn't work, what the larger dynamics are, and there's a lot going on there. So can we get the pitch for the book one more time?
Yeah, I mean, I really did write this, for these students who are organizing, the new generation of people coming up, who hopefully will learn not only how people approached this organizing, how it did definitely, people think Occupy failed, but in fact, it never ended for most of us. And it hopefully it gives leadership mindset, tactics, theory of change, so that you can understand. You don't have to learn for yourself what we already learned organizing, like who we're up against, what were the tactics used against us, what were the tactics that work, what were the strategies. And for me, it's, how do I stay in this work without burning myself out? And also there are, it's the first book to have 85 QR codes linking to video. So if you want to see, old hits like Lieutenant Pike, there's a famous, one of the first like memes was Lieutenant Pike was a UC Davis cop who was like just calmly pepper spraying UC Davis students. I don't know if you remember
that. Yeah,
it became a meme legend, and they would put him like spraying the Beatles, or like there were some great memes that came out of it. But yeah, so I'm hoping that they see some of the tactics that work, some of the direct action tactics, some of the things like have trainings. Think about like what is your long-term goal, because occupation as a tactic is not a sustainable goal. So think like a lot of us came out of Occupy seeing 84, really scary, right-wing libertarian fascists get elected to Congress, and Occupy as a tactic got its ass handed. We got our asses handed to us with the jackbooted, police state. So like learning that, but also there were some amazing moments like the M15 Spanish Indignados solidarity. Like have a big call to action. On October 15th, there were 1,000 cities in 80 countries that did solidarity actions, and they were shook. They were shook when this happened, because all of a sudden it was a global movement, and think about like, how do you escalate? I'm a fan of Abby Hoffman tactics. So in my book, there are other stories about me disrupting Governor Cuomo or Secretary Clinton, or, I did a fun one with Joe Manchin, where we use sort of like yippie style, like humor to tug on the beard of the establishment to make them look ridiculous. It's not always appropriate given the gravity of the situation, but so you gotta, but also having a long-term strategy. I'm a big believer in the inside outside strategy, because ultimately, how do you leverage the direct action and outside organizing to change policies? How do you directly use the heat you're generating to say, Biden, we need to stop funding this genocide? That we need to roll back, the criminalization of BDS, legislative, everything, all of the shit that is coming down the pike. There needs to be in my opinion, I believe having an inside outside strategy is really classically, the strongest theory of change.
Fair enough. Yeah, before I let you go, gotta ask, is that a bullhorn behind you on the bookshelf?
Oh yeah, totally. I actually, this was the last time I used this. We showed up to Comic-Con dressed as the QAnon shaman, which was pretty fun. It was for a comic book about the insurrection. So I went as the was going around the. But yeah, this was my bullhorn. But yeah, it's I went in full like QAnon shaman garb. Trolling neo-fascists was pretty fun. So yeah, good bit of fun. But yeah, hopefully people realize like just having a bullhorn isn't enough,
Yeah, fair enough. Well,
you can get it. Sorry, you can get the book BeTheRevolution.us.
Yes, please.
You can order it on all the different platforms, and I hope people get it.
All right. Thank you so much, Jay. All right. Before we bring on our main guests for tonight, just want to hit a couple of things quickly. So when we were doing the discussion of the campus protests earlier, I really did want to play the Texas clip, because I think that this is really amazing in what it shows you about the rapid turnaround in sort of culture war talking points over time.
Some colleges are banning free speech on college campuses. Well, no more, because I'm about to sign a law that protects free speech on college campuses in Texas. Shouldn't have to do it. First Amendment guarantees it. Now it's law in Texas.
1 hour later.
Yeah, I mean, this is the way that Greg Abbott was talking about the importance of vigorous exchange of ideas where nobody's triggered by anything. Like a few years ago, it really just shows you the way that these people, and I mean these people in the broadest sense, like political creatures, like Abbott, or for that matter, like libs who change their positions every other day, like operate that, this is that he went all the way from that to do we have the Abbott tweet here? So he had, we might not have this, but Abbott had tweeted that he was explaining the rationale for the crackdowns in Texas, and he specifically said that that anti-Semitism wouldn't be tolerated. Oh, here we go. Yep. Arrests being made right now and will continue until the crowd disperses. These protesters belong in jail. Anti-Semitism will not be tolerated in Texas, period. Students joining in hate-filled anti-Semitic protests at any public college or university in Texas should be expelled, which, obviously putting aside the absolutely ridiculous smear that if you're going to a protest against the genocide in Gaza, that's an indication that you're an anti-Semite, even though, anybody with even a past, I talk about this in the article I wrote last week for Jacobin, that anybody with, even a, passing knowledge of the dynamics of these protests, and certainly anybody who's been around these protests, there we go. It's called Pro-Palestine Protesters Are on the Right Side of History, knows that they're all massively disproportionately Jewish for, I think pretty obvious reasons, that if, obviously they're people of all backgrounds who go to protest, but I think that, people who come from a Jewish background where the issue has been more important in their lives are more likely to have spent more time thinking about it before, and, to have come to some of these conclusions and to sort of feel emotionally invested in it. The people who are, raised as Mormons or Hindus or Episcopalians. That doesn't mean, of course, that there aren't Mormons and Hindus and Episcopalians in all these protests, but obviously, even the most remote part of Texas, I'd be amazed if there was like a single college protest that was less than like 5 to 10% Jewish, right? Like that's just not going to happen in the real world. But putting aside the sort of cheap smear about that, what really amazes me about this is that he's saying in so many words that the reason for the crackdown is that he disapproves of the content of their opinion, right? He thinks that they're bigots, which, if you want these arrests to stick, is a problem. That the governor is saying that he's doing this because he disapproves of their, constitutionally protected, the content of their constitutionally protected speech. So I did want to get that out there, but we are at 8:40 on the East Coast. I know we've got these gentlemen for a limited amounts of time. So Jake and Andy, I will see you guys in the post game for patrons. And right now I want to bring you on the Daniels, Bessner and Steinmetz-Jenkins. How are you guys doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. What's that?
I can't hear.
Oh no. Okay.
I could hear you. Good. This is my perfect situation.
Yeah. Well, while he works on that.
Let me see. 1 second.
It's all right. Yeah. So while we were waiting for your co-author to come back, I did just want to see, as I did just want to make sure that you've seen this, that that if you're if you had any illusions that you could live in safety as a Jew in America, I hope that these illusions were permanently.
Yeah. So do you think these protests are like important, or do you think they're just, so why do you think they're important?
So I think that I think it's not sufficient, right?
I don't think anything's going to change with the policy.
Sure. But I think that it's,
so like in terms of like macro history, like what is going on here?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there is, honestly, as sort of hackneyed and overused as it is, I think that the comparison to Vietnam is pretty illuminating. That there are, despite the fact that obviously there's no draft or indeed U.S. boots on the ground, that I do think some of the dynamics of this are similar. And, I think that if it's very hard to see, right? This is obviously nothing I need to tell you. You've written a bunch about this, but it's very hard to see like a scenario whereby, right, public pressure, leads to dramatic changes in U.S. foreign policy.
To me, this is about the university. I mean, this is at this point disconnected from Gaza.
Well,
for the most part.
Here's what I would say about that, right? That I think that obviously it's very hard to see how that would happen, but I think it's, I also think that if you were going to build up momentum to the extent that it did happen, as fantastically unlikely as that may be, I do think that a lot of the buildup would kind of look like this, right? That, that I think there are reasons why students are more likely to, be among the first people to protest things, because that's usually lower stakes, right? You're a lot less worried about being kicked out than people are about being fired, et cetera, right? So I think all of that.
So you're relating it to the larger position of IP in American politics. Yeah, I'm just so pessimistic.
No, fair enough. Well, let me just say, without that, you did step on my joke.
Good.
So Jake, do we have the Yale video?
That she was hit in the eye.
Yeah, right? This is the single most dramatic thing that I have seen people cite, and they were citing it for like days. The big cable networks, New York Post, et cetera, that in a shocking anti-Semitic hate crime, this woman at Yale was stabbed in the eye with a pole of a Palestinian flag. If you watch it with the original audio, she's like kind of yelling at them, and then like there's a point where somewhere, as you see in the video, somebody walks past, and and she's ouch, right? So it's like that. I think this would maybe be more accurate to say was perhaps grazed. And
it's just it's stuff like that it descends so quickly into culture war bullshit so quickly.
And also just for fun, this is the woman who was grazed in the eye is the same person who gave us the great couscous controversy of 2020.
Is that so? Where it was Israeli salad versus
yes, it was Israeli couscous salad with spinach and tomatoes was briefly relabeled couscous salad with spinach and tomatoes, and it was like there was like a whole national news cycle about it, and they changed it back the next day.
Oh man, the media, 24-hour media was just a mistake. Like I think at this point we could agree that like the nonsense that is needed to be broadcast. Fair
enough.
Should not exist.
Other Daniel, you can hear us now.
Now we can't hear him.
Now we can't hear him. Amazing. Okay.
What is going on? Danny, click on settings and then click on audio and then click the mic and the speaker. And maybe take out your headphones as well. That the headphones always screw things up. Now he's unmuted.
Now you're muted.
Unmute. You can't unmute him from the board.
No, I can't.
StreamYard, get on it.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, it's the headphones. Nice. Yeah. Great. Hey, Danny.
Hello. Good to see you.
Well, I'm glad we could make this work. Yeah. No problem whatsoever. Bessner, everybody knows he's asked yesterday's news, but other Danny is his first time on the show, so welcome.
Thank you.
So you guys co-wrote a article for Jacobin, which is called Liberals' Heated Fascism Rhetoric, Sidesteps Self-Reflection, which I liked a lot. This is also closely tied to the subject of a book that Danny at the bottom of the screen edited, which is, hold on. Jake, do we have the book? Let's see. That's yeah, here we go. So Did It Happen Here? Perspectives on Fascism in America, which includes a article by me and top of the screen, Danny, which was originally published in Jacobin under the name Trump is the Threat to Democracy, but that doesn't mean he's winning. It was republished here under the name What's in a Word? And this has been, there's actually been a fair amount of discourse about this book since it came out, right? The New Yorker, ran a big review that, this was like the article from that day or whatever they emailed to everybody called Why We Can't Stop Arguing About Whether Trump is a Fascist. In a new book, Did It Happen Here? Scholars debate what the F word conceals and what it reveals. Which I found objectionable largely because it didn't mention our essay, which is the most important part of the book.
No, I agree completely. And they also do we close out one of the sections?
That's a great question.
Right?
I can't recall.
Yeah, because I remember he said something about like Sam Moyn being in the middle, but whatever. Yeah, I don't recall. But yeah, he should have mentioned us. Agreed.
The review would give the impression that Sam Moynes was the first piece and that Corey Robbins was the last. That is the case. Corey Robbins was the last, but Sam Moynes was chapter 8, I think. It was well into the book. And so there was kind of a strange reading interpretation of how, of how it was arranged, which we've discussed, Danny and I, elsewhere. But and what was reviewed and what wasn't is, who gets excluded. I was telling someone the other day, I don't think barely any of the people who contributed to the book who are women have been mentioned at all.
Yeah, in any of the articles. Yeah, it's
12
wild.
Of the, 12 of the 25 chapters are by women, and by the reviews, you would think it was 5 dudes that dominated the debate. So, we could talk about that later if you want, but just as an aside.
Yeah, right. I mean, it is interesting. Like, I have to say, I actually did find, in all seriousness, I did find the review a little bit frustrating, but largely for reasons that I find like a lot of what a lot of people say about the larger fascism debate often really frustrating, right? So, because if you want to be a complete nerd about it, then what's under discussion here is often what philosophers call conceptual analysis. You're saying, okay, we have this concept, fascism, and then we're going to like figure out a definition of it using the clear cases, like Mussolini and Hitler. And then we're going to see if our definition applies to other more controversial cases. So that's like, sort of a lot of philosophy, sort of Plato to Bertrand Russell is like kind of doing that. And that's like one way of reading what's going on here. But then you get some strange moves. And as I recall, it's been a little while since I read it. The review does a little bit of these too, where people will sort of respond to statements of pretty obvious disanalogies between the sort of new case that the label's being applied to and the canonical ones. Say, okay, here are things that seem like really important distinctive features of the original thing that aren't here, by saying things like, well, this is neo-fascism, or, well, this is fascism in its 21st century American form, which is different from fascism in its, early 20th century European form. And then I've got to say, just on that philosophy nerd level, I start to get frustrated because I start to feel like I no longer understand what the rules are for how we're arguing about this term, right? Like if it's not defined by the original examples, then like, is it just because you can throw in any old definition that
it's an absurdity, right? It's like obvious mind any side one. Anyone who doesn't admit that is just incorrect. And it's for the precise reason that you're saying that it's more an affective term that does not have a clear semantic referent. It's so obvious that what are we even fighting over? And that's fine. I think, Ben, your previous guest used the word libertarian fascist, neo-fascist. That's fine. That's political speech, right? Like you're using it as an intensifier to basically identify it as something really bad.
Yeah.
But this debate is not in the realm of political speech. People could use whatever they want when they're trying to make a point or trying to organize or what have you. This is an analytical debate about analogy. And because the sort of more abstract level that we're operating at is ultimately related to things like political strategy on a grand scale about macro level functioning of the contemporary capitalist economy. So that it's obviously whatever's happening now is very dissimilar from whatever happened in fascist Italy in the 20s and Nazi Germany in the 1930s. It's obvious. It was obvious from the beginning. So then what are we really talking about? And then
it's much more obvious now, right? Because
Trump isn't leading and he didn't do Gleichschaltung when he was actually governing.
Because Trump was actually president for 4 years, right? Like we, which is actually also a very weird thing about the, what if Trump wins discourse, that like a lot of it is sort of conducted in this way where we're all sort of pretending that didn't happen before, right? Like because in like 2015, you could just have this conversation in a totally speculative way, right? It's like, oh, well, here are some things he said, so who knows? But it's like, no, he was literally president for 4 years. And, I think Trump is really bad. I'd be very upset.
Yeah, obviously. If it's
so
annoying, you even have to qualify that. I just I resist it. Do I have to say Trump is bad? To be sure, Trump is bad.
Do you condemn Hamas of the fascism debate?
Right. It's so absurd. Yes, I condemn the slaughtering of innocents. Yes, Trump is bad.
Yeah. Well, both of those are true, right? So that's but it's like, I think Trump is very bad in lots and lots of sort of ways, although I have to say most of them are sort of boring ways that like, I think there are distinctive things about Trump, but I also think that like most of the bad things.
George W. Bush was a more transformative and worse president. I mean, that is an empirical fact.
Clearly,
clearly. That is not a debate. So yeah.
yeah. No, exactly. I think George W. Bush. Yes, I totally agree with you about that. We were actually having a discussion on the show about that a couple weeks ago. And
it's not what could be the argument for Trump. It's not even Bush transformed the United States state, the most powerful institution on the planet. Trump did not do that.
No, exactly. I think that like most of and I mean, if anything, I think the thing that like was sort of like had the biggest impact going forward after he left office that Trump did was just like appoint a bunch of Supreme Court justices that like Mitt Romney would have appointed.
Yeah, I mean, and which is absolutely terrible, and this is why I understand why people vote for Democrats. But like, if you're looking at misery caused in the short, medium, and long terms, and transformation of the state that upholds the global capitalist imperialist order, George W. Bush or Donald Trump, it's not even a question. Which is why at this point the debate has become a little bit tedious. Which is why the Register that Danny and I were writing and was sort of examining. It was a meta debate, basically. It was a meta piece on the debate, rather.
Well, yeah. So I want to get into that, right? Maybe starting with bottom of the screen, Danny.
Wow, burned.
Literally, he's at the bottom of the screen. I could say his last name every time, but that because it seems like, okay, I mean, just being pedantic about this for a second, like if you say, you know, if you're going to take it as like a literal debate, right? Like as top of the screen, Danny said, you like clearly people use fascism as like, you know, in the sense that the first guest did, in the sense I'm sure I have a ton of times, right? You know, that's like talking. I literally think I can remember talking to like my younger brother about like the DA election and be like, yeah, I don't know, I'm not really sure. This one person kind of sucks, but man, this other guy seems like a fascist, right? Like this is the kind of thing that's like, yeah, it's sort of like an insult, right? It's like a way of saying like really bad and gross and authoritarian, right? Like, you know, we all understand that, and I don't think anybody's nitpicking that, right? But like if you sort of, but like nobody's gonna have a scholarly debate about that, right? So if you're having a scholarly debate, right, they think, okay, well, one can be question is like, all right, is there like a really good analogy between these two situations? And then if the response to all the places that analogy breaks down and the new thing is not actually relevantly like the old thing is, oh, well, this is a new version of it, then it gets very hard to see what the debate is about. And so it seems like the sort of reasonable conclusion at that point, at least if you think this, you know, that, and I mean, you edited a whole book about this, right? I assume you find it pretty interesting. So is that, you know, my conclusion at least would be, well, look, I'd kind of like to put the literal debate to bed so we can actually figure out what the real underlying debate is. So if, you know, because it seems to me that the is Trump a fascist arguments are generally being used as a proxy for arguments about other subjects. And, you know, and it's maybe just more useful to directly argue about those other things. Like, for example, how different is Trump from previous Republicans? Or is it really important that, you know, Biden win instead of Trump winning? Or, you know, is, you know, how alarmed should you be about Trump? Or, you know, something like that, right? Like, is this your sense of this, that these are the sort of arguments that people are really having when they think that they're arguing about whether Trump is a fascist?
Yeah, my sense is that the goalpost is kind of moved. I think early on, at least when Trump was elected, and these you know, interpretations of fascism kind of took off, it was due to, you know, some of his entourage, you know, people like Steve Bannon, who had interesting reading practices, and you can make pretty clear connections between what Bannon was reading in the interwar period and what he was saying. And my sense was that until January 6th, the side that was really pushing hard for the fascism line was maybe on the losing side. But I think January 6th really for that perspective gave it a lot of validity. And then the weird thing is that there was a concession, I think, that was made that, well, maybe this isn't, interwar fascism. Let's try to think about it in a new way. And there was all these new characters they started to discuss in this light. People like Christopher Rufo got a lot of attention, Heritage Foundation, this new 2025 project. You had, the people focus on the Claremont Institution now. It's almost like a whole new cast of characters emerged, over the last 3 or 4 years that were totally different than the original cast of characters, right? Meaning that I think they recognized that some of those arguments weren't so convincing, and then they pivoted recently to this new group, even coming up with a new term, Alberto Toscano's term, I think, so-called late fascism, right? Which, tries to make some connection with old fascism, but sees discontinuations as well. So I think as you're saying, Ben, it raises the question, what is this really about? And is there a better way to directly address it? And my sense is that it's an attempt to, and I think Danny, we had a discussion recently about this, is to kind of target certain groups. And, there can be no ecumenicism with those groups. They have to be, defeated, maybe through a kind of system of militant democracy. And ultimately, the only way to overcome this is just, in a very militant, liberal kind of fashion, right? That's why the fascism, you need that term. I think essentially you need that term in order to act in a certain kind of way that you wanted if it was some other authoritarian group, right? I think otherwise I just can't see the reason why you would use this term. I think the politics of it is pretty clear.
Yeah, so this does bring us, I mean, I do want to follow up on that point in a minute about January 6th, but I mean, this does bring us to really directly to what you guys are talking about in your article, right? That because I think that's what you guys are really talking about, which is, what's the function of why are people invested in this, right? So because this is like oftentimes like when I get frustrated about this, like the way I'm inclined to express is like, look, we should be able to, it's kind of sad if you can't get it up to oppose bad things without making each new bad thing, just like a version of the interwar European bad thing, right? Like other things can also be bad and alarming and, have reasons to oppose them and all that stuff. But, I think, and if, top of the screen, Danny, if you want to get in on this, like they have a, I think that this is, what you guys are pointing to in the article is really why you think, if you want to speak to this, like why you think it is that liberals as a group, right, tend to be really invested in this.
Well, I think
diagnosis.
The major thing is modern liberalism justified itself through modern liberal democratic capitalism justified itself through the defeat of fascism. Modern liberalism was made in World War II in a real way, and it was institutionalized during and after the war. So in a real way, the left-right political spectrum that we all here take as natural really only took off in the United States during World War II, partially as a means to justify liberalism as the only wise path forward, in particular form of American liberal democratic capitalism. So fighting fascism is the moment of modern liberalism, even though it relatively quickly after the war transferred from fighting fascism, which was defeated, to fighting communism, to fighting particularly Bolshevism, and then kind of international communism with the CCP and Ho Chi Minh and the Vietnamese Communist Movement and other communist movements in Indonesia and elsewhere, and the United States being amalgamated into this existential struggle. But it was fascism that made modern liberalism in a real way. So I think there is a deep empirical connection of modern liberalism to fascism. And so liberalism is in crisis. For a variety of reasons. The imperialist capitalist promises of the 1990s have failed. Yet liberalism remains the only available ideology to people in a real way. This is why I said Fukuyama was right. So for that reason, liberalism, which is in crisis, is now defending itself through the identification of fascism, even though the analogy very clearly doesn't hold, except maybe in rhetoric, and even frankly, not really then. So that is why I see a key reason that fascism has been adopted. And then you have this millenarian aspect, which I could let Danny speak to, which is what we talked about in the article precisely, even though that was what I just said was the backdrop to the article.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with everything that Danny just said. We're going to sound like a broken record if I keep making that refrain about our agreements. But yeah, the piece, I originally was trying to write it as an op-ed for the New York Times, and I wanted to say something different than what I said in the book. And one of the things that struck me was that during the 2022 midterm elections, there was a rather doom and gloom way of predicting what was going to happen, which is that there was going to be this red wave, and that the Republicans would win the House and the Senate, and this would eventually result in a kind of authoritarian path, especially if Trump was elected. That those predictions didn't happen, and it seems as though it was based on a lot of poor interpretation of polling or polling sponsored by Republicans. But for me, it just kind of revealed that this kind of crisis of democracy framing is used as a way to get to galvanize people to vote. Democracy's on the ballot, right? Joe Biden said, what's happening on the right is semi-fascist, and when that seems very apocalyptic to me, in the sense that that within this election, everything is going to depends on what happens, and if it doesn't work out our way, then the end is here. And my impression is that mentality, that way of thinking, is very common right now. We had lots of books that were published right after Trump won, How Democracies Die. And this literature did not exist, at least in terms of public-facing literature, did not exist before Trump's election. And yet somehow overnight, democracy's dying. And I just thought, and as I've explained elsewhere, coming from a kind of conservative, evangelical background where I was told these kinds of things all the time about, apocalyptic scenarios, it just seemed to me to map on so well. And as we point out in the piece, there is a long-term millenarian tradition in this country. As the piece says, the Great Awakenings, this marked liberal and conservative forms of Christianity in this country, and I don't think that secular liberals are immune to it. So that was just a different way to try to figure out, try to enter the fascism debate, because the big apocalyptic kind of antichrist thing here is fascism, right? And it creates this doomsday scenario where if we don't pull out all the stops right now, then the end of the world as we know will kind of essentially happen, right? That's the way it kind of sometimes reads, at least to me.
Yeah, for sure. And like going together with the apocalyptic tenor of that, I mean, look, the sort of basic thing about fascism, I mean, this is like, obviously there's like a very specific tradition of sort of left politics and thought about fascism, but also just in terms of sort of general culture, that part of the reason is, kind of seems like World War II is like the last big dramatic moral story we could all agree on. And so everything has to be sort of interpreted in that light, right? So you have like, and not just in America, I mean, everywhere, right? Both sides of the war in Ukraine, right? Very, very energetically compare the other side to Hitler and like make a really big deal about those comparisons, right? But but like, if you are in this apocalyptic battle, then like, yeah, you just need to wipe out the people you're in that battle with. I mean, that's you don't like nobody thinks that the way to defeat actual literal fascism is to just like, craft a better message to like appeal to the fascists so they won't oppose us anymore, right? Like it's not how you beat fascism, right? I mean, like you're calling people fascists. I mean, this is one of the things you guys really put your finger on in the article. Like, there's no way to say that without the implication being that you're talking about people who just have to be like excluded and just radically defeated. Right. I mean, like, otherwise I don't know what you mean.
Yeah. I can't be in the same world as fascists, you know, like literally they would want to kill me. So I truly believe, I mean, they don't really believe it. Right. I feel like a lot of people said this when the article came out, tweeted around it. We didn't talk about it, but it's just like, obviously they don't really believe it's fascism, right? They wouldn't be acting as they did if it was fascism. That's Hitler. That's Hitler, guys. Do you know what Hitler was? What Hitler did? It's absurd at this point.
Yeah, I mean, and there are all these people who will, like, I don't know. I mean, I'll even see this weird combination of views where people, you know, I think, you know, will say Trump is a fascist, and they clearly don't think Biden's a fascist. But it's like, well, if you really believe that there's like a very good chance that in several months a fascist will be president, then like, wouldn't you be like, wouldn't making sure that Biden won be like the most important thing in your life? But like, there are all these people who have these bizarre combinations of views where somehow that's not the case. But it's also like, I mean, it really seems like the bigger context you guys also talk about, right, in the article. You know, when you talk about the like deeper dichotomies that aren't touched by this, it's like, look, if you really like, as hard as this is to imagine right now in 2024, right? If you were actually to have like a successful enough left that it achieved some kind of like decent minimum of social democracy in America, it's really hard to see how that could possibly happen without a pretty dramatic realignment of current electoral politics, which would presumably mean that you'd found ways to appeal to tons of people who voted for Trump. I mean, like mathematically, like I just, you know, don't see how you could possibly get around
especially
that.
in a two-party system. I mean, you have to. It's ridiculous. Sorry, Danny, please.
Oh, no. I just want to add on here. I think the response from some would be, well, it's the people that aren't really the issue. It's actually their elites who are fascist.
Okay.
They're dopes. Essentially, this is an anti-populist line, right? Which is that, and it goes back to the interwar period, which is that these elites, these different thought leaders, these different political leaders are the issue. Let's target them.
Sure.
And the issue is that they're actually deceiving people who might be conservative or might have some strange views, but for the most part, they're just kind of low, you know, basic, low educated, can't think for themselves. Yeah. There is a kind of on the critique of fascism, there is a kind of liberal elitism that has very low views of the average person's ability to think for themselves. You can see this in like Timothy Snyder's book, for instance, where he's essentially giving day-to-day instructions on what to look for, as if, you know, some of the instructions, I actually live in the same part of town as Timothy Snyder. And if you were to go on the other side of the hill here, you would be in an all-black community. And I keep thinking to myself, when there's huge racial tensions in this town, you know, the advice that he gives to people in that book is a kind of advice I think a lot of black fathers would give to their black sons. Watch out when you're around, certain groups of people. Watch out when you're around the police. Watch out. You know, it's like this has been happening for years, but somehow now it's being applied to, you know, these fascists. I mean, so it really, I think, is revealing of the kind of, you know, there's a bit of elitism, I think, whether you think all these people are fascists, which I think maybe some do, or whether you think they're not, but they're just being duped. It still kind of says something about what they think about common people.
Sorry that I laughed. But someone in the chat just said fascism is when Austrian painters, and that was it. And I couldn't stop laughing at that. Oh, that's good. God, the internet still has it. No, Danny, I completely agree. I think the debate is probably waning. I think there's less to be gained.
Well, so let's talk about the dynamics, because something that the other Danny said earlier is that, you know, he was saying that he feels like it kind of waned to a certain extent, or some of the energy went out of the yes, this is definitely fascism side, as you know, Trump was president for 4 years. And like I saw some discussion in the chat earlier about COVID, which is like, yeah, look, I think like the Trump management of COVID was really bad, but it was really bad in sort of the opposite from what you'd expect from a fascist government, that like rather than taking a crisis and using it to assert all these new authoritarian powers, I actually could have, like honestly, I would have liked a little more authoritarianism during COVID than what we got, which was kind of like, like
I mean, we all know fascism is when Austrian painters.
But
no, it'll probably come back, especially if Trump wins. I can't imagine how there's not going to be more books about saving democracy.
Well, but like one of the things that bottom of the screen Danny pointed out is that it did have a real resurgence, in essentially the beginning of 2021, right? Because of January 6th. In fact, there were major figures like Robert.
Yeah,
Paxton.
Ben, didn't I do the debate with the Know Your Enemy guys, right? Well, that was right after that.
Yes, we did.
Right?
We did.
Yeah.
The Matt Sitman and Sam Adler-Bell.
Yeah.
Because they didn't like our the essay that was republished in this
they didn't like that one. Sam didn't see. I guess Matt seemed to dislike it more than Sam. From what I
think that's fair. But I think it was a perfectly reasonable, civilized conversation. But I think that like you could definitely tell that with those guys, right? I mean, their sort of investment in the issue was like really renewed by Jan 6th. Again, Robert Paxton, somebody who seems very authoritative on fascism, said after January 6th, "Oh, I was wrong. I guess it is fascism."
But Danny, hold on, time out. Danny Steinmetz-Jenkins actually has to speak to this point because it relates to his very specific understanding of interwar French history.
Sure. So let me just say though, right? Like, Rick Perlstein, for example, right? Came out and said, "Oh, this is fascism now," right? So there were a lot of people who are not just like, podcasters, which we can all agree is the lowest form of life, but like, like actual like scholars with some credibility on this, right? Who did have that response to January 6th. But with that, let's throw to the other Danny.
Yeah, Danny, explain this. It's very important, actually.
The interesting thing about Paxson is that he relies on this infamous riot that took place February 6, 1934, near the National Assembly in Paris, in which some old veterans groups that might have had some fascist tendencies stormed a building. I think it was the Place de Concorde, and essentially 9 people were shot. And this was kind of the origins of the Front Populaire in France, because the previous year Hitler received the chancellorship, and there was a real concern that there was going to be some kind of fascist movement in France. It's substantively debated amongst historians of whether that constituted a coup, right? So whether where you come down on that, we can have a discussion. But that itself, whether that actually was a coup attempt, is debated. And so if that itself is debated, then to use that, like Robert Paxson does, to then transpose that onto what happened on January 6th and say, well, this is fascism because it confirms what happened on February, in 1934, is interesting in that
seems a bit. I'm just going to say, seems a bit silly and like a bit of a stretch to me, Danny. I know you don't want to say it because this is your field, but it seems like a bit of a stretch.
Well, the guy I study, I'm writing a book on, Raymond Aron, for instance, who's loved by this crowd, many Cold War liberals, was actually around at that moment, witnessed it himself, denied that it was ever a coup attempt, and held that position for the rest of his life. He was adamant about that. So I just say that because even though Robert Paxson is an eminent historian, we all have high regard from him.
Of course,
that he himself is essentially taking a stand on what happened in that older event and then applying it to this other one, even though this is all very debatable.
Yeah, and I mean the other. Well, actually, so while we're at it, right? I mean, the other sort of constant analogy that I would hear is the beer hall putsch, right? This is what people always say, right? That if you've ever had this conversation,
that's so ridiculous. Oh my god!
You know the script, right? You say the sorts of things that Danny on the top of the screen and I said in our article, which are like, well, there doesn't seem to have been any possible scenario where this would have led to the overthrow of the government. This, basically to go to sort of skip straight to like the real underlying thing that people are debating, when they sort of once again, like underneath the verbal debate about whether to call this like a coup or a coup attempt, to skip right to the real debate, right? Like that basically our point was you should be much less concerned about authoritarian threats coming from riotous mobs than you should from authoritarian threats coming from like the national security state, right? Like I think that's the real political, gist of it. That's like, not like this thing's good. I mean, like, not like we like the people who do this, but like that they have but the sort of catastrophizing of it is what we're trying to push back against. And when you say things like that, the way people always respond is like, oh, well, see, the beer hall putsch was like half-baked and, and a miserable failure and, couldn't have succeeded. So
one happened before the guy was in power and one happened after. I mean, it's just so every second, it's just like absurd. There's no way compatible what happened in Munich in the early 1920s with Hitler leading it's just
well, you want to expand on this just a little bit, because I think this is something that's like, again, I know I've heard this line like 1,000 times talking about this.
So where do you want to start? That it was like a march with Ludendorff, a gigantic hero from World War I that came at the end of a series of dislocations in the Weimar Republic, Bavaria in particular, a center of Catholicism and right-wing thought, the spiritual home of the Nazi movement, some attempts to throw up a putsch against the German government, which failed and which had very little to do with what actually brought Hitler to power later, or what brought the Nazis popularity in the late 1920s, to something that happened about 100 years later, at the end of a particular term, with no military buy-in whatsoever, with a completely different context in every way, shape, or form, except they involved people trying to, what would the comparison be?
So I mean, this is always the thing. I think
what are they comparing? I don't understand. That there are people trying to do something in a mass against governments.
Yeah, I mean, that's
the comparison. I mean, it's not a comparison.
It also seems like two other really relevant disanalogies are that the Nazis who tried to overthrow the government of Bavaria with the goal of overthrowing the German government in the beer hall putsch, very self-consciously understood themselves to be enemies of parliamentary democracy, right? That was like their whole point and self-conception.
But also, like, there were ideas of like you could run these states, right? There was there were these various revolutions in 1919 and 1920 where you would create like city councils and stuff, right? It was just such a different context.
Sure,
but overthrowing the national. I mean, by
like it does say something relevant at the risk of being, self-consciously given bottom of the screen daddy's point about, about sort of portraying people as dupes. I think that I don't think that the people who stormed the Capitol were the brightest bulbs. And I think that those are people who believed, right, that Trump actually got more votes, right? That he really won the election, which is just a very different thing from self-consciously trying to overthrow parliamentary democracy. That seems pretty relevant. And I also think that really my thinking about this was probably influenced by reading Trotsky on fascism at an early age, while involved in the sectarian left, and, thinking like, okay, what he really emphasizes is the sort of street fighting mass movement aspect of it, right? That sort of taking these extra state forces that that engage in street level violence and smash up socialists and communists and unionists, and can eventually, with fascists take power, sort of supplement the traditional mechanisms of the state. And even though you do have these like microscopically tiny clownish militias that were involved in this, like by and large, this is an action of like a sort of amorphous crowd where nobody's actually willing to fire a weapon, right? Like the only weapon that's fired is by the cops, right? So this just, it just seems very, very, very radically unlike, they seem very, very different from each other. But I mean, like the thing, I think to me, maybe, right, the thing that's most important to you guys' article, and I want to be sensitive to your time constraints here, is, when you talk about the way that this sort of catastrophizing fascism analogy that leads us to think either several tens of millions of people are fascists, or they're just too dumb to realize that they're effectively fascists. That you say that this leaves this encourages the so-called resistance to think of its members as the children of light, to borrow the language of the theologian Reinhold Niebuhr, who believe they're doing the Lord's work to topple the children of darkness. Such a Gnostic way of seeing the world. Impossible, as the problem is clearly with them and not with us. Meanwhile, political authoritarians and nativists the world over continue to win election after election, and deeper, truer dichotomies between, for example, the small minority of capitalists and the vast majority of workers are mystified, while the attendant exploitative dynamics remain unaltered. So if either of you guys felt like kind of speaking to that or expanding on that.
Yeah, I do want to just make a brief comment regarding just the previous thing you said, and then I'll jump into that.
Sure.
One of the interesting things about Hitler when he received the chancellorship in 1933 is he kind of went out of his way to say that he would abide by international liberal law. He repeatedly said that he would not try to remilitarize the Rhineland. He even said that well into 1935 and even early 1936. In other words, even though this was just a ploy to allow him to rebuild the military, he actually denied being committed to the things that he had said in Mein Kampf. He said he was just a frustrated guy. He was young and foolish at that point. But the point to make is that he actually used the liberal language and actually said that that the real aggressors were actually the French and the British, right? Mm-hmm. So it's interesting insofar as Trump doesn't seem to be doing those kinds of maneuverings, right? It's much more in your face, kind of saying rather direct kind of things. But I just want to say that, he was feigning some kind of adherence to liberal international order up until, the remilitarization of the Rhine in 1936, which was a real shock for a lot of French people, right? But at any rate, yeah, I mean, I think, I went to divinity school. I, read a lot of Reinhold Niebuhr, and he is loved to this day by every president cites him, which, makes me wonder why we did in this piece. But, I think the idea is essentially that he's an Augustinian, and the notion is that everyone is, we're made in the image of God, but we're also sinful. We all are self-interested. And in our attempt to be righteous, we have to recognize that we are just as we're unrighteous, right? It's a pretty simple idea, but I think we, in this kind of Manichaean way of seeing the world, a lot of people lose sight of that, and it prevents them from the kind of self-reflection that might raise questions as to what they're actually doing wrong. I played a lot of sports growing up. The way I think about it is this: if I was getting my ass kicked at halftime, I would be shocked if my coach said, why the hell are they kicking our ass? I blame them for kicking our ass.
Yeah.
Would actually say, well, what are we doing wrong? And what adjustments do we need to make at halftime so that we can come out and win the game? And that kind of move right now doesn't seem to be the move that a lot of liberals are making. It seems to be, a totally different, strange way of thinking, right? Relying on old playbooks that don't really work, and aren't visionary and aren't self-reflective as to the errors that they themselves are making that are allowing these kinds of advances from the other side to happen. So it's a simple insight. I don't think there's much too profound about it, but something that if you believe you're just, totally, you're on God's side, I think it prevent you from, maybe realizing that maybe you're not all the time, right?
Yeah, I love that analogy. Guys, thank you so much.
Hey,
Danny.
I'll see you next week, right?
Yeah.
Thanks next week.
Yeah. Good to meet you, Mr.
DSJ.
Ben,
thanks for having us on.
I was enjoying listening to you speak.
All right. Thanks, Danny's.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Dude, I wanted to I wish Danny could have stayed, and then we could have had the real debate that the people want, which is post Black Album era Metallica, good or bad.
Well,
and then we could have got into the is grunge even a genre debate or conversation, and then your views would have skyrocketed. Super chats galore.
I mean, as you know, I'm a Black Album apologist. That's actually maybe even more problematic than my position in the fascism debate.
I'll say this about the Black Album.
Yeah.
I've been in this weird reflective mode because I'm doing a show tomorrow night about, we've been calling it "Is blah 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 year the greatest year ever for music?" And it's just not. We don't care if it's the greatest year. We just want to talk about these 15 years that
you done 1969 yet?
65. I was going to hit you up about that. So
okay,
that's an off-air conversation, but I'll hit you up about that. That's coming up.
Right.
It is coming up. And I was gonna hit you up about that. I haven't even hit Conan about it yet. But I'm doing a Tuesday just on metal and punk of 84 because a lot came out. Ride the Lightning comes out in 84.
Yeah.
And I was listening to Ride the Lightning a lot the last couple weeks. For, kind of getting ready for the show, and then I made a playlist, which is literally everything metal and punk that came out that year. Early Whitesnake comes out in 84 as well. And when you listen to those records, and I read a really interesting interview, I can't think of the guy's name right now. He's like a Swedish fellow that produced those early Metallica records. I think he did the first 4. He said by the time they did Ride the Lightning, he said they had bigger visions, but their playing ability wasn't there yet for what they had envisioned, what they wanted off that record. And when you hear "And Justice for All," which for a lot of people is the pinnacle, it's like the magnum opus of Metallica. If you really sit down and listen to it today, it's not that good of a record. And I'm not just talking about the mix. The songs are long for no reason. There's a lot of repetitive stuff. It's like, why does this song need to be 8 minutes long? Right? Especially when it doesn't go anywhere. There's a lot of long it's a very self-indulgent record, right? And when they work with a producer that's going to tell them no, like Bob Rock, who's coming off of Motley Crue's Dr. Feelgood, which was just a massive record for 1989. And there's another big hit Bob Rock produced. I can't remember off the top of my head. One thing Bob Rock said, if anybody's watched the year and a half of the life of the making of the Black Album, Bob Rock says the band never captured themselves live. And, we have a mutual friend here in Mexico, Shaka Kani, who, I don't know if she ever told you all her Metallica stories, because
I've heard a couple of her Metallica stories.
She would spend her money on concert tickets when she was not in the free world. And so that made me go down this rabbit hole of videos to find for her, because for some reason she doesn't know how to search Metallica concerts. So I actually found a concert that she was at, Monsters of Rock. She was at Monsters of Rock. That's Van Halen, Metallica, Dokken, Scorpions. What a show, right? And Metallica plays second. After Kingdom Come, right? But when you listen to that band live and then you go back and listen to the records, as good as I think Master of Puppets is, I really think Master of Puppets is like them firing on all cylinders.
I'm a huge Master of Puppets fan. I saw somebody mention that in chat too. That's like that to me. I mean, it's actually kind of funny if you think about the timeline of some of those records. The order isn't always exactly what you'd think it would be in terms of like the stylistic change, right? Because it's like what they're doing in a record like Master of Puppets feels to me more like what they're doing even in something like the Black Album, than it does, and in even some stuff that actually comes a little bit. I mean, Justice for All, even, right? Like this is So yeah, I mean, I will say, well, actually, sorry, I cut you off.
No. Look. Hey, Metallica as a subject, you want to cut someone off and get your point out. I get it.
Yeah,
I just think when you listen to the Black Album, and this is, and I'll be a bit of a defender of it, because as a 46-year-old man that was like 13, I think, when the Black Album came out, what was his first? So Inner Sandman for me was not a continuation of Dyer's Eve.
Sure.
Right. And that's what I wanted as a 13-year-old angry little kid in Richmond, California. I wanted a continuation of Dyer's Eve, because everybody else was going Mach 1. Everybody else was going faster and heavier, you know, and the two records from my favorite groups, Megadeth being my favorite, and Metallica, Countdown to Extinction, also the singles were real clean and shiny and very formulaic. If you listen to Megadeth's album, that I believe comes out before the Black Album, and then by the time the Black Album hits, the songs are shorter, and Kurt Hammett is playing rhythm. Those rhythms were all James Hetfield before in the studio, just doubling, tripling up the guitar, and so it's looser feeling because they want to get the live feel. So those two things for me were real hard to get my head around. And in typical Metallica fashion, whether you like the guys or not, they've always been fearless in wanting to make records that they want to make. The symphony records, you know, even going back to Ride the Lightning, Fade to Black was a song people were like, what the hell are you doing? Was this a ballad? It's a ballad. And then it becomes standard for heavy music, not the power ballad, but
no, this is why I always think of the Bill Burr joke, right? Where he's like, you know, kids today don't know what music is. You know, when I was a kid, we listened to real music. A man in a dress would sing about the devil, and one song on every album was a ballad. You know, music.
Yeah, I have heard that. Yeah, no, and he's right. That was scary tough guy music when we were young, and it's funny to, when you repeat that, it sounds crazy, but I have a love-hate relationship with the Black Album. I respect the Black Album, and I had written something some years ago about Metallica and post-Black Album that you met some of my friends from the studio.
Well, I was actually just thinking about that, right? So this is, as we said at the beginning of all this, definitely one of my most problematic opinions. I always used to think it was a little kind of funny to sort of try to do a running tab of like all of the things that like the takes that people are most mad at. I think that like it was kind of amazing, like a few years ago when I Jesus, it's 2024 already. A few years ago, when I used to semi-regularly, right? I mean, I'd go on either the Majority Report or Katie Halper's show, and it was always fascinating seeing the people, the detractors in both of those chats, because they were very different, right? So the detractors in the Majority Report chat would be like, Ben is like, a class reductionist, brocialist who loves the, January 6 rioters because they were mad about that article I wrote with Danny and, and Glenn Greenwald and whatever. And no shade, I love Katie, but like in her chat, people who didn't like me there be like, Ben is a Democratic Party sheepdog. It's like,
always a sheepdog.
I want to get you guys in the same room, right? So you can hash out like which of these pictures is correct. But
always a sheepdog.
But yeah, look, I think that we can add this, like something everybody can agree on is a problematic take is my love of the Black Album. But I was going to say that when your pamphlet came out, I was a Teenage Anarchist, which is at that Alfie's pamphlet house, as I understand it, is outselling Slavoj Žižek's. And in, I like both of you guys, but this is the we'll celebrate that.
Thank you.
And so when that pamphlet came out, we did a book launch up in the Bay, and So you and I were in a panel with actually, so remind us, like, this is like
Sure,
kind of I think if you were into this kind of music in Northern California at a certain time, I mean, these were all names that you'd know.
Those guys right now just got back from South America doing festivals, playing in front of tens of thousands of people. They played right before Merciful Fate and shit. Craig LaCicero from Forbidden, he's the original guitar player of Forbidden. Rick Hunolt, the original, well, the Exodus you guys know, not the Kurt Hammett Exodus, but he's the man that replaced Kurt Hammett in Exodus. And Chris Contos, who most people know as the drummer from Machine Head, he's playing in Forbid now. He was also in an 80s thrash band called Attitude Adjustment. Oh no, Ben's gone. It's just me. I wanted to know where Ben wanted to go with that. But those are some of the friends that I had at the studio. And I wanted to do a book launch where we don't necessarily talk too much about the book, but I wanted to talk with some of my friends from the era in which I talk about in the book, the early days of hardcore punk and metal. And those guys were there. They were also part of some political, movements at the same time too, which was kind of fun hearing them talk about, protesting and fighting with cops and stuff like that. But talking to those guys for the longest time and picking their brains about what was Metallica like after the success of the Black Album. I remember Chris was the one that told me, he goes, after that album, they just didn't talk to anybody. If you saw them around, they would just walk away because they were just so big. They were on a different level than everybody else. It's no more playing, the Kabuki Theater 2 nights with your friends, and your life just changes for you when you get that damn big.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that it didn't change for you too much after your pamphlet started out selling Slavoj, but still stay in your guest room in Rosarito sometimes, but with
all the guitars.
That's true. There are a lot of guitars in there.
There's the guitars in there now. Yeah.
Well, I did just want to point out that it actually came up in that panel discussion, and all of those guys certified that it was not in fact a Poser record when the question was asked. So go back and check the video. But in any case, I did want to talk to you about something you wrote more recently. So Jake, if we have the graphic for this, this is Jason's article in Sublation, the Ballad of OJ, America's real life Bigger Thomas. And this is a fun article. This is your, after OJ Simpson died, I think most people who commented at all, like, look, I mean, I think that, if you probably killed your wife, that's probably, there is a certain way that it's kind of reasonable that that's like the top line of what people are going to remember, right? It's like all those jokes about, you build 1,000 bridges and fuck one goat, right? You're not the bridge builder, right? You're the goat fucker. But but you do take a more interesting perspective on this in the article because you go in. I was lucky enough to read some early drafts and think about this a lot. They have you go in and talk about like kind of OJ himself, of course, but like you're also using, I think, what he was doing in the way that people were perceiving what he was up to at different points in his life as kind of a way of saying some bigger things about American culture. So, this is like, look, if, probably says a lot about my background and when I grew up and all of that stuff. My main association for OJ Simpson before the trial, to be completely honest about this, is Naked Gun.
Sure. I mean, I know how old you are. I won't say on air unless you don't tell people. I don't know, but you are not old enough to even be alive when he was playing.
Yeah, that's also literally true. Yeah.
So there's no way that you could have been like, back when I watched OJ with my dad.
No, definitely not. I mean, I would probably maybe watch the Naked Gun movies together, but
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
But yeah. So yeah, I came into the OJ story during the OJ actor phase. But yeah, I mean, I guess maybe you want to just kind of get the ball rolling with like a little bit about this guy's life, and in particular, the way that he was kind of perceived in terms of narratives about, race in America.
Yeah. I mean, OJ's life gets a bit of a, how do we say it? There's 94 OJ, which kind of lives in infamy in the courtroom with the gloves not fitting. And then there's OJ after the documentary, the ESPN 30 for 30. And there's a lot of issues I take with their portrayal of OJ, because there was a narrative trying to be spun with that.
Yeah.
And one of the things he kind of wants to call out, and then Jay-Z does a song called The Ballad of OJ where he uses this line, "I'm not black, I'm OJ." And so for a lot of people, that becomes who OJ Simpson is, right? A lot of people look at him as this guy that left his black wife for the white lady and is a sellout, and he's this, that, and the third. And I didn't think that was a fair portrayal, number one. And I'm not like an OJ apologist by any stretch of the imagination, but one of my big issues is there's this term called coon that's been totally changed.
Wow.
And what's frustrating is someone like OJ gets called a coon, and then real coons get called authentically black. We changed the term, and now authentic blackness becomes or cooning. What we would have called cooning years ago becomes authentic blackness. Like people calling Clarence Thomas a coon and stuff like that. It's like, I wouldn't call him a coon. I mean, he was a black nationalist for a lot of his life. And if you think just because he married a white woman, that makes him a coon, like that doesn't even make sense to me.
Yeah, I actually remember a conversation with you years ago where I was like, well, Clarence Thomas seems to have changed a lot over the years. He used to be a black nationalist, and now he's a Republican. You were like, yeah, it's not that big a change.
It's not that big a change, man. Hang out with those. Hang out with Farrakhan. Hang out with anybody in the Nation of Islam. You know what I mean? Like it's a very conservative ideology. And so I started off with that, like, hey, if this is the way you see this guy, try looking at it from this perspective. The pre-Black Power era of the civil rights movement is kind of asking for what you get with OJ. Right? Just let us see our humanity. Very, very liberal asks, right? And OJ is that. And the "I'm not black, I'm OJ" line comes out. I think he said it in college. And it had to do with the dude that was kind of organizing these athletes around the Olympics, wanting them to wear the black glove and the fist for the Black Power movement.
Mm-hmm.
And OJ didn't dig it. He was like, I think those guys are being used. If the powers that be don't want to F with me if I do that, are you going to take care of me and my family if I can't get a job after that? And you can argue like, no, well, that's a soft. Okay, I can get the argument to a certain degree, but I mean, what did it do? And what was your goal? And I think OJ kind of asked those questions in that comment. So I talk a little bit about that. I talk a little bit about the fact that OJ is black excellence personified for years during his NFL career. To think of him as a sellout is really interesting because he's on the cover of these black magazines, Jet and Ebony, which are were staples in my grandmother's household growing up, and they were kind of must reads for me as a young person. So, you know, I was hoping that would have been the cover of the piece, like OJ on the cover of Jet or Ebony magazine with his black ass kids and his black ass wife. Is he a careerist? I don't know. Maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Does he do like many men do? Oh, thanks, Anna. Does he do like many men do? Of his ilk, leave his current wife for a newer model. And you know, she was, when OJ meets Nicole, she's 18 and he's 30.
Yeah.
And his wife is pregnant at the time. And he you know, leaves his wife a few years later for a much younger woman. But that's kind of common with older men of this era. In general, it's common with older men. You know how many women I met when I was still on the dating apps whose husbands left them for much younger women? You know, you got to put that in perspective. I don't talk too much about the trial because the trial is the trial, right? I don't really want to argue the trial with people. But I do hate the narrative. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. So I want to hear the narrative you're talking about, but I was just wondering, thinking about the trial, like, I think I said this to you a little while ago, but like, there's something that over the years has increasingly seemed strange to me about the way that we argue about individual criminal cases as if we were having political arguments. And like, look, I don't, you know, if my, you know, in case my credentials as a, you know, as a boring Midwestern white guy are about to be questioned here, I do think that OJ is probably guilty, but like, I think that but like, I don't know these people.
No.
Right. Like I'm not, you know, I have a, I don't understand what people think they're arguing about when they argue about this stuff, right? Like I can understand it if it's like, oh, this is going to set a precedent that, you know, that they like a, you know, if the Supreme Court is ruling about the constitutionality of something, right? Like then I understand why everybody's invested in it, because it's going to like affect everybody going forward. Is, you know, do you have to read somebody Miranda rights or not or whatever, right? But like, just whether, you know, because like whether you're talking about this or, I mean, like you can probably, without breaking a sweat, I'm sure you could name like a dozen like individual criminal cases.
I named in the piece, I named another athlete. I named Aaron Hernandez, who killed, that people think he killed multiple people. Then I named the Olympic distance runner Pistorius. Can't remember his first name.
Yeah.
Is it Oscar Pistorius?
Yes. I think that's right.
After a fight with his fiance, he accidentally shot her through a door. Intruder. Thought you were an intruder.
Yeah, that's a very plausible thing that accidentally happens. I think, and saw somebody in the chat having fun with my use of the word probably. It's like, look, man, I haven't thought about this case.
Look, dude.
It literally 30 years. I think that was the last time I spent more than 10 seconds thinking about it.
I didn't want to litigate it, but I did also want to look at the case. I wanted to do two things. I wanted to look at, you know, kind of.
I mean, I do remember the old Chappelle thing about this, where he, like the premise of the skit was that white America wasn't ready to hear his uncensored thoughts. So he was going to write them down, and then a pretty white girl was going to sing them out for him. And so it's all this, you know, crack cocaine was intentionally distributed to destroy the black community. So was AIDS. And then one of them is, OJ didn't do it. Okay. Yeah, he probably did. Right. Like, that's like kind of like, as the years passed, right, I think there was more of that, you know, consensus, but it's like, I don't give a shit. Like, not really. I mean, it's like, look, I mean, I don't, you know, I'm sure I would if I, you know, if like I knew Nicole Brown Simpson, but like I have like, I'm not, but you know, it's like, this is somebody who probably did something horrible that like, I don't, it's just weird to me the way that it's like, you know, I mean, I was joking earlier about this sort of like, you know, cultural tribalism of it, but like there's the way that it's like, I keep on seeing like individual cases happening. It's like, there's a reason we have trials, right? We don't just like hear somebody describe something for 30 seconds and be like, okay, that probably happened next. Right. Like, this is, and it's like, people get invested in like individual trials as if this were like a test. Like whether you think individual people are guilty or innocent is like a test of your moral or political values. And, you know, it's a very sideways point to what we're talking about, but like, it's just very strange to me. And I kind of wish that people would stop doing it, you know, cause it's like, this is, I don't understand the point.
It's the trials of the century are interesting because that was my first time hearing.
Yes, Tom. Also, Ron Goldman. I do also remember him, but yes.
Oh, so what about Ron? Jesus. And when you think about this moment, this trial preempted the NBA playoffs. They stopped the NBA playoffs to show it.
Oh my God. I could actually vividly remember because I was in because it was like, because when the ruling was announced, my memory of it at least is that I was watching TV and whatever channel I was watching, like they had one of the other things that was going on at the same time was there was France was doing nuclear tests in the Pacific, and literally, channel I was watching, they spent like 5 minutes speculating about the verdict because the verdict was about to be read. Like it hadn't been read yet, but they spent like 5 minutes on air speculating about what it was going to be. Yeah. And then they read off the other stories in like 20 seconds.
Yeah.
So like literally there was an image of a mushroom cloud spreading over the ocean. Then they cut to commercial. It's like, you know,
and no one, look, there's a few things no one remembers. No one can tell you about the Balkans and what was happening there. And we had troops there at this time.
Yeah.
And everyone can tell you about where they were either when the chase happened, which that screen capture, the article is a picture of the chase, which is also extremely iconic. And what's interesting about OJ is he kind of becomes everything for everyone. He's a sellout one minute. He's a victim of his pathology the next, because he's basically just this black kid from the projects that, you know, can't get right.
Yeah,
and
this is your Bigger Thomas analogy.
That's the Bigger Thomas analogy. For those that know who Bigger Thomas is, he's a character in Richard Wright's Native Son, where Richard Wright is trying to explain the pathology of poor black people in Chicago. And in talking about this article and brainstorming it with our good friend Toure Reed, he said, hey man, you got to read the introduction to the Black Metropolis. He goes, I read it for my first book. It's really important because Richard Wright is informed. A lot of what he's informed on about these pathologies comes out of the Chicago school. I was like, really? He goes, yeah. And he does me this huge solid. I was in the Bay at the time. I'd driven up to the Bay to see family, and he screenshotted each page of the introduction for me. He's like, just so you don't have to wait to order it or anything. Here you go.
Wow.
And in it, there was a quote that I put in my piece where I'm going to paraphrase it, where Richard Wright basically says, you know, you got to watch out for these pathological Negroes because much like Hitler came out of a slum, these slums are just little Viennas, he says. They're filled with little fascists.
If there's one thing I learned from the previous conversation, it's that fascism is when Austrian painter. So yeah.
Very different conversation about fascism in the late 30s and 40s, right? And so people that love Richard Wright, it's funny. I was talking to Pascal about this. He goes, oh, I read the piece and blah, blah, blah. He goes, and Pascal goes, you know, I read Native Son in college. He goes, I hated it. It felt like the white man's gaze at poor black people. And there's something about that book where it's kind of this amazingly horrible story.
Yeah.
About this guy that just can't get out of his own way. And it gets mimicked. If anybody's watched the movie American Fiction, that is the fake book that the author writes in the actual novel Erasure. He pretty much rewrites Native Son, but he takes out the white people and makes everybody black.
Yeah.
Which is even more like, whoa. And then, and then he has these thoughts in the book where he's constantly thinking to himself. And one of the thoughts he has is D.W. Griffith going up to Richard Wright saying, "I loved your book." Right? So
I've got to read that, but yeah.
So it's like, is OJ a victim of his pathology? Like, is this a real thing? Do these people just have pathology? So let's look at all the celebrity murders in the 20th century alone.
Yeah.
Is this all pathological for these people, or is it just the colored ones? Like, who is it pathological for?
Yeah, why is this different from any of the other celebrity murder trials?
Yeah, you know, we're not asking, you know, Lana Turner about her upbringing when, you know, she went to trial. So
it's also, by the way, I just want to pause on that Richard Wright line, because there's something really strange about that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I guess it's like an argument that libs should care more about inner city poverty, which is good. But the argument is, you never know, one of these, one of these benighted Negroes in the projects might turn out to be Hitler. How would that work?
I feel like what he's saying is that there's a troubled population that's not going to get right because it's inherent in their being, that because of the conditions in which they live, this is what they are. And that's what you get with underclass ideology. Right?
Yeah.
And that's what it's all about. It's all about, it's inherent to who you are, and you can't get out of it. So if OJ's from the projects of San Francisco, he's from the pre-civil rights projects of San Francisco, then it's in his pathology. And you get your comeuppance if you felt he was guilty in 2007. When he, which I found funny, found some black people, and then right, the sellout, and goes and tries to steal his stuff back, and they attempt to put him kind of under the jail. They give him a max sentence. They threw a bunch of charges at him, like kidnapping, and if you remember, the room was bugged. I think the dealer might have been tipped off or something, so he had the room bugged for sound. So he had the room bugged when the DA comes in.
That's just...
And the DA comes in, he's like, we got him. LA couldn't get him, but we got him.
It's just also, it's so awesome. It's like, what's the... Like, you got, you probably got away with murder. And, like, if so, you're like the most person in the world who has most famously gotten away with it. Like, I mean, you can't just be like, wow, I really dodged a bullet there. And like, be very careful about the remainder of your life.
I'll dip my toe into conspiracy land with everybody watching. Hopefully you get more views. A documentary came out in 2012.
Yeah.
I was living with the White family at the time. And my now ex that I did music with for years, we were sitting in our room in that house, and we saw a news story. And they said, oh, a documentary is coming out about this serial killer that claims he killed Ron and Nicole. And we were in between tours, and our eyes got as big as Oreo cookies. And we're like, we got to find this thing. We got to watch this thing. We found the documentary. We watched it. I tell everybody to watch it. It is very interesting. I mean, this man is a convicted serial killer. He's on death row in Florida, I think. And there is evidence that he worked for Nicole when it all happened. Okay. And the story is that OJ...
Because right up until you said that, I was like, well, I think you mentioned it to me once before, but I didn't remember that detail. My reaction is like, yeah, I don't know, man. I think a lot of jails are full of a lot of people who are happy to like confess to any famous thing. that has happened anywhere.
You are preaching to the choir on that point. But what's interesting is you watch the documentary, his family's in it. His family's like, he would, and it's not the whole documentary. It's just a part of it, because he committed, I think he says he committed like 70 murders. Did he commit 70? Who knows? Sure. Did he commit murders? Yes.
Yeah.
So he calls his family and goes, I'm working for Nicole Brown Simpson. His family's like, who the fuck is Nicole Brown Simpson? Like OJ's wife's like, who the fuck is OJ? Right? These are rednecks. They don't know. Fuck, they don't know, don't care.
Yeah.
So that man had a white truck. Of course, OJ had the white Bronco. And the story is, again, I wasn't there, don't know, but this is interesting. The story is OJ, and this doesn't absolve OJ of anything also. The story is OJ goes to the dude and goes, there's this necklace Nicole has, and it's like tens of thousands of dollar diamond necklace he had got her. And he's like, fuck that broad, I want the necklace back. And he says, he tells the guy by any means necessary he wants his necklace back. So the story the guy tells is, and I haven't seen this documentary since 2012, and what year is it, 2024? If I remember correctly, he says he went in to get it, but Nicole came back early with Ron Goldman.
Mm-hmm.
And dude panicked and killed him, and then called OJ. And that's why you get the two sets of footprints.
Oh, I see. Yeah,
so it's like, I mean,
yeah.
So OJ's legal team, and keep in mind, he's acquitted, right? He's you can't retry him. They went and gave all this evidence to the Los Angeles district attorneys, and they were like, nope, F you, we don't want it. We know who did it.
Yeah, Kato Kalin. Yeah.
Everyone knows it was Kato Kalin.
Yeah. Well, we're going to continue this conversation in the post game for patrons. So I do see we have a couple of super chats. One of them is from our good friend Anna Kasparian. So I always enjoy listening to Ben's chats with Jason. Thank you so much, Anna. The other one is Dizzle McDizzle, who says, I forgot to ask about the hose. So if you want
those hoes loyal?
Well, if you want to know whether Jason thinks those hoes are loyal, you're gonna have to stick around for the post game. We're gonna keep you in suspense. But in any case, if you are already a patron, I think I put up the link. I forgot to do it earlier when I should have, but I put up the link about 20 minutes ago. So you should see it there, and we will see you there in I don't know, 2 minutes, give or take. So sounds good. It is, if you are not already a patron, there's no time like the present to get your life together and become one. So that is patreon.com/Ben Burgis. And I will see you guys there. Left is best.
Peace.